Wade from Dalton Wade Real Estate Group, and today we're joined with John. Lisa. And Claren is holding the phone. So today we're going to talk about writing an offer. This is a little bit more geared towards, sort of your first offer for a newer agent in terms of, but also a good refresher for, for existing agents. So, kind of what you need to know before you actually write the offer. What information do you need to get from your client so that you can actually do the offer? You want to have that, as much of that up front, so that, when they tell you they want to write the offer, you can get it done quickly, because sometimes if you delay, somebody else will beat you to it, and you won't end up getting the property. So getting that offer in quickly in this market is very important. So what do you, and we're going to kind of go through the contract step by step. So the first thing is, is there anything your client wants that isn't automatically included? So one is usually the washer dryer. That's always one to ask. Do they want the washer dryer? If yes, you can put it in the contract, but it doesn't mean that the client or the seller will leave that. But something to ask for if they want it, because sometimes they think it's it's there, it's part of the house. So you want to make sure, because you don't want to get to the end, right? You're at closing doing the walkthrough, and and the washer dryer's gone, and then they thought that should have been there. Has that ever happened to you, Lisa?
Well, it has with, no, it hasn't.
Alrighty, so anything they want to remain, if it's not written in the contract, it needs to be added. There's a line for that. Okay, sometimes there's stuff there they don't want, just the opposite. There's an ugly shed out in back, or there's a nasty hot tub, nasty workbench, or something that's old and really has no value, and they want out of there. But if you don't tell them to take it out and put that in the contract that it needs to be excluded, remember, anything attached, any structures, they are assumed to stay, right? So if they want stuff gone, you got to put it in the contract and get the seller to agree to it. Okay, so the next one is, you want to, obviously an easy one, the purchase price. You want to ask them what they want to offer, how much they want to put down. Again, if you're representing the buyer, you want to put down less. So if there's any issue with the deposit, or the seller gives them a hard time because you're canceling, there's less money there than if you put more down. And then just talk about this on the other side. If you're working with the seller and you only have $1,000 in escrow, and then a couple days before closing, they find something they like better, they can dump you. All you get is, your client gets, is $1,000. You'll probably have a pretty upset client. So again, if you're working with a seller, you want to get the more money the better. Shows commitment. If you're working with a buyer, less money put in. If there is a problem. John's got a question.
Yeah, in terms of that, do you have like a benchmark in terms of percentage that you would recommend?
When I was practicing up in Massachusetts, it was 5% was kind of the standard. So if you had a $400,000 house, people put $20,000 down. Sometimes it was less, but 5% was kind of the, what was expected. Here it's a lot less.
I've been seeing 1%.
Right, 1%, type of thing. Again, 1,000 is sort of, I think you can get an offer accepted with $1,000 down for if you're working with a buyer. But again, if you're on, so there is no standard. It's all a negotiated thing. But again, less for the buyer. If you're submitting that contract, you can put 1,000. See what comes back, right? If they, they may just skip over. You get maybe a not too bright agent, they just skip over that. They don't advise their client that you really should ask for more. So there is no sort of standard. It's just whatever gets negotiated. So on the buy side, start low, $1,000. See if you can get it accepted like that, and then if you're working with a seller. Obviously, you want to get more than $1,000. You want to get, up to $5,000, because again, it's very rare that someone will walk away from $5,000, right? So, but sometimes they'll walk away from $1,000 because the house, they found a better house, right? And then you're left sort of having to start all over again. So, and that's really the seller's only recourse. So the initial, so you want to talk to your client and explain to them. Why you only want to give $1,000, but sometimes, the seller may ask for more. And then, you know, you need to know, are they getting, you know, are they paying cash or are they getting a loan? And hopefully you found that out, you know, far before the time, you know, they're writing an offer. I mean, you'll have that conversation with them. And then depending on which way they're going, cash or financing, hopefully, again, before you're writing their offer, you have their pre-approval or you have their proof of funds showing they have the cash. And again, why you need that is because you know, you want to get that offer in expediently. You don't want to be sort of doing the offer and then waiting to get the you know, and it just all takes time. And then, you know, the house that they've, you know, picked and liked, you know, could go under agreement with somebody else. If you have all this stuff, I mean, you know, up front, then you can get it in quicker and, you know, have a better chance of you know, getting the contract signed. And then if they are getting financing, what type of financing? You need to know, are they conventional, FHA, VA? You know, we've done some trainings on, you know, the difference in terms of what the house has to, the condition of the house, if they're FHA or VA, you know, it has to be in a little bit better shape versus conventional. So, you know, you don't want to put them in a house that isn't going to pass, you know, the FHA or VA inspection. So you want to know that. You want to know the amount they're going to be, you know, to be financed. One of the confusing things I always find, not for me, but for a lot of agents, is the initial deposit and the amount the person is financing, right? So they're putting 5% down. So sometimes, you know, this is again up in, you know, when I was up in Massachusetts, I'm the listing agent. She was a brand new agent from Caldwell Banker. The house is $300,000. She put 60 grand in escrow. So she thought, oh, the deposit and, you know, the good faith deposit and what the person, you know, was you know, going to be putting down towards their loan were the same. So again, she exposed her client in a way that, you know, could have been financially devastating if, you know, for some reason, you know, they didn't end up adhering to the terms. So they're two very, very separate things. They're separate. There's, you know, there's the initial deposit, what we talked about, and then, you know, so if your client is putting, you know, they're 20% down, they're borrowing 80%. So if the house is $300,000, they put down $1,000, they're financing, you know, $240,000. So then they've given $241,000. They need $59,000 in cash, you know, so it kind of all adds up and balances. So you want to ask them, you know, or their lender, you know, how much are they, you know, putting towards their loan, and that's the amount to be financed. So that's an important one. You know, what's the acceptance date? The acceptance date, you usually give them 1 day. So you submit the contract today, you know, the offer is valid till tomorrow. Why you only give them 1 day is because, you know, so Phil's a good listing agent, right? So he gets that offer in. He's going back to everybody that's looked at that house, anybody who's expressed any interest, and I'm telling them, oh, I got an offer now. Do you want to put, you know, this, I'm trying to generate that second offer so I can go to highest and best and hopefully drive the price up for my client. So the more time I got to do that, maybe, you know, that offer comes in the second day. Now I can't really tell them I've got a valid offer anymore because it expired. So you want to keep that, you know, acceptance period short, typically 1 day. Then the next is the closing date. Okay, so you got to ask your client, like, okay, when do you want to close? When do you want to take ownership of the home? And then you want to make sure, they'll tell you, oh, I want to do it in 3 weeks. Then you got to ask their lender, can you be done in 3 weeks? You don't want to, you know, say we're going to close in 3 weeks and then the lender takes 5 weeks. That would be a problem. Then you got to ask for extensions, and sometimes you don't get them, and blah blah blah. So you want to make sure, if they're getting financed, what that closing date is. The lender, you know, 99% sure they can deliver. The next one is the number of days, you know, for the inspection. You know, typically there's 15 days is the default. Sometimes you put 10 days, you can get the inspector out there. You know, if you're putting your offer in and it looks like it might be, you know, a hot property, you know, you might even do 7 days or 10 days. You know, so the faster you can get the inspection done, the better your offer looks, because then the seller knows, well, it's only off the market for, you know, that many days. It's 15 days, you have really up until the last day to cancel. And then, you know, and again, if you're representing the seller and that offer comes in, you know, at 15 days, there's really no reason why it should take 15 days. You can usually get an inspector, within, a week. I mean, and then you got a few more days, so again, depending on what side you're on, sometimes if you're on the buyer side, more time is better. If anything comes up, sometimes you got to get quotes and have a contractor come in, and you want to have the time to do that. Then the next one is, do they need closing costs, any assistance with their closing costs? So you need to ask them that, and then you need to ask their lender that as well. If they've only got, say 10 grand in liquid funds, and the house, they're going FHA, it's a $200,000 house, they need 7 grand for that, and then say their closing costs are another 7,000, well, they need 14,000, but they only have 10, they're not going to be able to close. So in that case, they would need to get some assistance with the closing costs from the seller. And then oftentimes, again, when you got their pre-approval, you're asking their lender, because he theoretically has checked, their liquidity, how much money they have. So he'll know whether or not, they need. And even if they don't need it, sometimes they still want it. They just want to finance their closing costs if possible. And then again, you want to have, their pre-approval in advance, a copy of their proof of funds in advance. And if you kind of have all these things, it'll help you in being able to sort of get that offer in expediently and, hopefully get the property secured. John?
Okay, I don't know if you're going to talk about this later in your presentation, but what about buyer credits? Like, let's say that there's the seller is offering a $20,000 credit for kitchen upgrades. Could that go into the mortgage as well?
Not really, because typically you're limited in terms of the amount you can put in. So if they're getting a conventional loan, it can only be 3% of the purchase price is a credit. And then if it's FHA or VA, it's 6%. So probably 20,000 credit would be too much. And then the other thing that becomes problematic with that is that the appraiser is going to see that, right? So then basically, say the house is 400,000 and there's a $20,000 credit. He's really knowing the house is only being bought for 380, it may not appraise out. And then the other thing that's a problem is if the credit doesn't get used, right? So say there's a $20,000 credit, but then the closing costs are only 10 grand. Well, a lot of time, and again, it's situation by situation, that $10,000 could be lost by your buyer. They may not get that credit. They can only get the credit for what they actually incur in closing costs and prepaids. Now, sometimes what can happen is I've seen a couple title companies, they will cut them a check back, usually not, or they can go back to the lender and try to buy down the rate through points so they can use it that way and then get a lesser rate. But then they only get to use it if they stay there the whole 30 years. So if they move in 5 years, they didn't really get to use all of that credit. So,
Thank you.
yep. So that's kind of how that works. So, any other questions? Any questions in Periscope land? All right. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll be back next week. Have a great holiday.